Well, Ifeoma Ebu is the Director of Strategic Design Initiatives at the New York City's Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. She's an urban designer and a strategist with more than 2 decades of experience internationally. And in her office, she leads interagency design and built environment initiatives to transform communities across the Big Apple. And today, she's here to reflect on some best practices on building community capacity and resilience. Can't wait to hear your talk. Thank you very much. Ifeoma, everyone.
Can you guys hear me? Yes. Great, great. Thank you to the Kingdom of the Netherlands Consulate General, as well as the Craft and Design Institute, as well as Our Future Cities for inviting me and welcoming me here. I've been feeling so welcome. I've had the wonderful opportunity of living in this beautiful city for 5 years, and I'm so excited to be back to share what I've been doing and up to in New York City. I'm really going to give a really high-level presentation of some of the projects that I've been working on in New York and this other projects in New York City as well, and really thinking and speaking about building capacity in communities. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, by a Nigerian mother, and I often spent summers going back and forth to her village, her childhood village. And so I constantly grappled with just like the experience of being in her village and really seeing community-led solutions as a way of life. And living in New York, where that wasn't the way that things are done. And so that really has colored and inspired my own perspectives on building resilience in communities. Eric Klinenberg, in his book, Palaces for the People, he defines social infrastructure as those third places, not your home, not your work, but those places where community happens. Those places where meaningful engagements occur and really forge social bonds in communities. And it's because of those social networks that they can mean the difference between life or death in the midst of a crisis. And so the work that I'm going to present now is really in the context of that understanding of social infrastructure and how they can be created into safe spaces in communities. So as a part of the Mayor's Action Plan for Neighborhood Safety in New York City, I work with a team. We work in 15 different neighborhoods across New York City. There are 5 boroughs in New York. And we specifically focus in public housing. And here you would refer to as social housing, but there the density is a lot greater. The buildings are a lot taller. You have a whole lot more people packed on a much smaller piece of land. And these are the most vulnerable communities in the city. And someone earlier talked about the stressors, and it's because these communities are dealing with all the stressors from a legacy of racial oppression. So these are the communities that have high unemployment, high rates of incarceration, poor health outcomes, et cetera, and so forth. And so the approach that we take in addressing crime prevention, particularly in these communities, is really understanding that there's been a systematic racial oppression that has occurred. There's been this legacy of marginalization that's occurred in these communities, and those are the key issues that need to be addressed. Crime is just the surface of how these issues bubble up. And when you actually go down and you think and you start to address those issues, then you really will start to have an impact on crime. And so I'm going to focus on 2 communities in particular. One is Red Hook, which is right by the waterfront, and the other one is Brownsville. And I'll just showcase a series of projects in those 2 neighborhoods. So our process really has started with capacity building, really understanding that residents are the experts of their own communities. Government doesn't come in, we're not the experts, we don't live in those communities. But each person in this co-creation process brings their own assets or resources. So community brings manpower, they bring their expertise in the neighborhood. Government brings resource and access to experts. And through that co-creation process, there's this knowledge exchange that happens. And so in these 15 communities, we take residents through this capacity building. We help them understand creative placemaking, which is using arts and culture to transform public spaces in their community. They also understand crime prevention through environmental design, which is a methodology that was started in the 70s that really addresses public safety from a design perspective. We also help them learn the root and understand the root causes of crime and how they result in the crime that they see and experience in their lives. We bring in experts to help them understand how to do neighborhood and community audits, to walk around their neighborhood and understand where is the dysfunction in their physical environment and how does that dysfunction create opportunities for crime. We also train them on how to develop action plans. So we empower them with this information. We provide a small seed fund for them to do a catalyst project, but then we also help them develop their own action plans and implementation because we want them to experience a process that they can replicate after government pulls out of their community. So this is really the process of strengthening, and resilience is born out of that strength that comes from this capacity building. And then implementation is really testing of ideas. And we do the process over again. We train them again in wherever the needs are, whether it's an evaluation or more surveying, whatever the gaps are, so that they're continuously building their capacity to do things on their own. A part of the capacity building is also just training residents on how to map their communities, how to understand just graphic layouts, but then also how to take those maps and create heating maps, which are really using color to illustrate areas that feel insecure versus areas that are really actually quite dangerous because there are gunshots that happen in those areas, the crime lords that have taken over particular areas. And so they use color to illustrate those different zones in their community. We also train them on how to create social activity mapping and demographics mapping. So these types of maps really show where do young people hang out versus senior citizens in their community. And so when they begin to look at those two maps together, the heat maps, the social activity maps, they begin to understand that there's a relationship between the reason why there are some areas that are really quite active and other areas that are not. And really looking at the two and how to bring some of that activity from one area to another in the process of developing, first of all, choosing the locations where they're going to focus their efforts, their projects, but then also in the process of developing this social infrastructure. So these are what some of the areas that look like, and they're just not utilized, and for a number of reasons. You can see there's trash piled up in in one of the images. Some of the images, people feel like if I walk at this place at night, I'm going to get attacked for sure, even if there's a children's tot lot there, because no kids are playing in that area because the area feels unsafe. And there are sort of underlying reasons as to why people don't use these areas, and there are also opportunities. There are opportunities to really think critically about how can this place be transformed through programming and a physical intervention to really activate the community. And that's what neighborhood activation is all about. Neighborhood activation is a study that we did for 6 months that really uncovered design strategies that can address public safety. And also it was a capacity building program. And so the intention of neighborhood activation is not only to activate public space physically, but then also activate social networks in the community through this co-creation process. And so, another speaker spoke about stressors in the community. And through this engagement process, we uncovered 6 key areas of vulnerability in the community, whether it's poor health outcomes, a lack of job opportunities or opportunities for entrepreneurship, lack of opportunities for cultural events in the community, significant violence in the community. These are all areas, and these are essentially the root causes of crime in the community. And once you think about how to address these issues collectively, you begin to think about creating safe spaces in the community. So I just want to talk a bit about safe space and connect it to this idea of social infrastructure. So you can see that there are different sort of like sections on this wheel here. And this is a way that you can think about social infrastructure or the transformation of any space holistically. And when I say social infrastructure, again, I mean those places like community centers and parks and plazas, those places where community happens. And so this slide here really presents an example. So if you think about what's here, the example that's in what's here, it shows youth engagement, health and wellness, culture and community. So imagine you have a community center that is focused on teenagers, and they have wellness programs there, and they also have cultural events there. That center only focuses on one segment of the community. What happens to the seniors, what happens to the moms and dads, and what happens to the little children. So if you think about how to fill in those missing teeth, how to think about jobs and skills development, environment, or programs that address violence prevention, then you're really thinking holistically about how that place can become a safe space for the entire community, but then also a piece of social infrastructure for the community as well, a real place where intergenerational networks can be formed, social bonds can be built in the community, and that is what really creates resilience, the social resilience. These are the ingredients for safe spaces. So imagine if a neighborhood has several of these safe spaces throughout the community, and they're all connecting people to diverse programs, but then also forging new partnerships towards public safety or whatever the needs are in the community. And so these safe spaces can really create places and environments for social resilience to occur. And this is social infrastructure. But then you also think about those connections, those roots from one safe space to another, and how can you take advantage of those roots through public art or through your bus terminal. What are ways that you can leverage those features on public streets to really, again, build social cohesion? So I want to land all these ideas in place. And this is one of the projects in Brownsville, Brooklyn. There's this corridor called Belmont Avenue. You can see those tall buildings in the back. That's an example of public housing. This essentially is the kinds of buildings, environments that we work in. Belmont Avenue, and then the green area there is Osborn Plaza. And it's a dead-end street that sort of dies into the public housing. And so Belmont Avenue used to be a thriving commercial corridor that has disintegrated over time. It's now plagued with boarded-up shops. And you can imagine there's all kinds of crime that happens in this particular area of the community, or has happened. And so people didn't feel safe going there at night. And therefore, the businesses weren't thriving because you didn't have active use of that commercial corridor. And so, but over time, it's become an incubation space for testing out of many different ideas on how to develop social infrastructure. And so this is one of the ideas. After we did this neighborhood activation study, we partnered with a community cafe called 3 Black Cats. It was started by 3 young women that were born and raised in Brownsville. And they started this cafe because they loved baking goods. But the cafe also had business incubation spaces. So if you had a small business, you wanted to use a conference room, there was a conference room there available for you for free. And so they offered this to the community. And they also wanted to think about how could they activate the street to attract more people to come to their business. And so we forged a connection between them and the Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation has a program called Street Seat Program. And what it does is it provides a resource to businesses to create seating in front of their store in 2 parking spaces in front of their store. And you can imagine, parking is quite tight in New York. You have to pay for it. And so this is a bit of a luxury to be able to use that space, not for cars, but for just like recreation. And so the business actually designs the street seat however they like. You can see they did this really culturally Afrocentric style street seat there. And then they also had a jazz cafe at night. And so their programming extended not only during the day, but also extended into night and transformed this public street into just like a social space. It began to have the residents thinking differently about that street, thinking differently about that Belmont corridor. It's no longer a space that they don't feel comfortable going at night, but now there are cultural activities happening there. And that's, I go back to that circle of safe space. We've now expanded the activity happening in this cafe. They're no longer just a cafe or incubation space. They're now a space for cultural activities, et cetera, and so forth. And a lot of the programming that they do there is with young people and curating the kinds of programs that they do at night. And so, a big part of it also was just like thinking innovatively about how creative placemaking can be used to address public safety at night. This other project was done with the Brownsville Community Justice Center. They're a community-based organization in Brownsville, and they particularly work with at-risk youth, so essentially young people who have been involved in the criminal justice system or may get involved in the criminal justice system, so they really reach them at a really critical point. And so there was this vacant lot you can see here. And there's plenty of them throughout Brownsville. And so it was owned by a developer, and the developer donated the space to the Brownsville Community Justice Center because they also felt that they wanted to contribute to the safety of the community. It was in their best interest because they had other properties in the neighborhood. You invest in one place, it has a trickle effect throughout the community. So Brownsville Community Justice Center worked with young people. They did a series of engagement sessions with young people and came up with the idea to transform this vacant lot into a teen center. And just by using shipping containers, and I know that shipping containers are used here quite often as well, and the township communities. And so they've transformed this vacant lot into a teen center where young people can learn fashion, art, architecture, just have a space for themselves at whatever hours they so choose. And that's one of the things at times in these communities, there isn't enough programming for young people at night, which leaves them idle and without a lot to do. And so that's sort of what this initiative was really trying to address. And in a lot of my slides, you'll see a principle at the bottom. And these are some of the principles that came out of this neighborhood activation study that we learned through testing these ideas, principles that are really good for people to apply. This is another project out of the Brownsville Community Justice Center. They transformed this dead-end street, and I showed in that image the green square. It's called Osborn Plaza. And this was, again, another dead-end street that was taken over by gang lords. People didn't feel comfortable walking in it. And it was actually the entry point to this public housing development. So it just made it quite difficult for people to even go home because they had to walk through this insecure area. So Brownsville Community Justice Center worked with actually those young people that would hang out in this area selling drugs and transform this dead-end street into a plaza. And they partnered again with the Department of Transportation, who offers support to take temporary plazas and make them into permanent pieces of infrastructure. So this is another example of just transforming physical infrastructure into social infrastructure. And so now this space is a place for poetry nights, for fashion shows, for festivals throughout the year. I mean, it's really become an amazing active space for the community to come together. And it's even, again, transformed the nature of that Belmont corridor. And so the mayor's office, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, we partnered with another mayor's office, the Mayor's Office of Technology and Innovation. And we also partnered with the Department of Transportation to put forth a design competition called NYCX Challenge. And so what this design competition did was it served to partner tech entrepreneurs in the city with community-based organizations in a capacity building program to come up with new design solutions to address nightlife, improve nightlife, and public safety along that Belmont corridor in Brownsville. And so, again, Brownsville Community Justice Center won this competition because they're brilliant organization. But they partnered with another company called People's Culture, and they were the tech innovators. And they prioritized young people in this process of capacity building. So the young people learned coding through this program. And they learned how to essentially take projectors, add sensors to those projectors, and code those sensors so that they map motion data. So as more people visit a space, the projector changes its image. And so the idea that they put forth was that this plaza, again, Osborn Plaza, would transform into a digital museum. And so as more people visited the space, the images continuously changed. The young people were responsible for curating the imagery, so it would be images that they wanted to see in public space. And it was just amazing coming together of just young people learning from technology, entrepreneurs, in this really opportunity to both light the night, because that's a key part of public safety, is lighting the night, but in an innovative way through projections, but then also artistically recreate this space and transform it from just a dead-end street into a thriving piece of social infrastructure. And so when we tested out, we're still in the testing phase of this, but when we tested out for the first time, it really was quite exciting. The kids were excited. They were excited to see their projections out in public space. They were excited to work with the technology entrepreneurs to just like find out how they could tweak their ideas and tweak the projections. It really brought the community out, and they felt proud to see their young people serving as leaders in civic engagement and transformation. And it really enabled these social connections. So this whole process of the young people learning coding and implementing and testing these ideas really just served to like create a social cohesion in the community. And so another neighborhood, Red Hook now, is also in Brooklyn. And Red Hook is surrounded by water in the north and the west and the east. And after Hurricane Sandy in 2012, it was one of the communities that was the hardest hit. And it's also a high crime neighborhood. So you can imagine it was a vulnerable state before, and imagine the state that it's in afterwards. And so this organization, the Red Hook Initiative, before Hurricane Sandy hit, they had co-created a Wi-Fi system in the community, and it made all the difference after Hurricane Sandy. And so this initiative that they implemented was called Red Hook Wi-Fi. And it served to really build resilience through providing economic opportunity, because the residents were trained as they were implementing this program. It was really community-led. And so I'll just show a brief video of the initiative.
Red Hook is like a little town. Just about everyone in Red Hook know each other, but we don't really have no hub in which residents of Red Hook and business owners can like communicate with each other. And to me, that made absolutely no sense.
We have a lot of opportunities and events. We're trying to get to the community, and it was hard always to bring the community into our doors. What's a better way to disseminate our information?
With instructions in hand, this team of Red Hook residents installs a rooftop router.
Well, Red Hook Wi-Fi was essentially a way to increase our reach into the neighborhood. Hurricane Sandy came and all of the communication networks got wiped out, but Red Hook Wi-Fi and our nodes stayed up. They had power. Our network became like the central communication source for especially public housing residents in Red Hook for 10, 20 days after the storm. And so because of that, we were able to sort of gain attention and resources.
I went through this program called Digital Stewards Program.
A year-long technology training program of the Red Hook Initiative.
I got a little taste of everything in the technology field.
And then they sort of focus on an area, and then eventually that they build their skills further, and then they go off to an internship and a career.
I come in every morning, I check the network to see if any devices are up, down. We have to look for ways to expand the network, pitching to businesses and stuff like that.
We're building a free Wi-Fi network for the communities, but the whole thing happens because of digital stewards, community members, staff at RHI. If there is success, it comes from the fact of so many people being part of the work.
I came here expecting just to get work, and it completely transformed how I think and in my path in life.
Okay. So I want to end with one final project. And, they call New York City the city that never sleeps. And it's because most of us have day jobs, and then we have our side hustles that we do at night and on the weekends. So my side hustle, one of my side hustles, is to serve as the advisory board member for an organization called Black Space. And we are a coalition of young Black urban professionals, most of us living in Brooklyn. And we span all sectors, architecture, planning, real estate development, economic development, graphic design, industrial design. And we are really all committed to Black communities, particularly Black communities that are experiencing rapid change or gentrification. And that's a word that I haven't really heard today, and I think it's one of those silent but deadly forces in communities in particular. I see it happening here in Cape Town as well. And it really serves to erase Black assets, particularly in Brooklyn, and displace Black leaders, completely transforming communities so those assets, those social infrastructure do not survive as a result of the change and the rate of change as well. And so a lot of our work is really based in working with communities to develop ways to help them preserve their culture, conserve their heritage. And through this process of developing methodologies for doing that with community, we co-created this Black Space Manifesto. And we've just recently launched this Black Space Manifesto, and it's for professionals as well as community leaders who are really grappling with change in their community and wanting to understand how can they keep and retain their businesses, their important assets, those important locations, those places and spaces that really begin to demonstrate their culture in their community. And so we created this manifesto just for that, and we've made it open for anyone to connect to it and tap into and use. And so I'll leave you with one of the principles here that I think is one of my favorite, and it comes out of Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategy. It's Move at the Speed of Trust, because trust is really at the heart of this co-creation work. If you move beyond that speed, if you move faster than the speed of trust, you won't have a sustainable product. It really is about working with communities in a way that respects who they are, what they want, what they know. Building capacity is a way to move at the speed of trust, because as you're doing the knowledge exchange, trust is being built. And so if you want to learn more about Black Space, you can visit all of our social media handles. Thank you again so much for listening, and I hope I've inspired you. Yeah.
Any questions for Ifeoma? And I hope you all tweeted that, by the way, move at the speed of trust, because that is just such an iconic line to take away, I think, from this conversation.
Hi, I'm just aware of Black Studio at Wits. Are they linked to this initiative in any way? Or
To Black Space.
Black, yeah.
No, not at all.
Is it? So I need to link you up with
Absolutely,
Black Studio.
sure. We are now spreading. We're based in New York City, but we have a chapter in Chicago and a chapter in Oklahoma City, and we're open to an international chapter in Cape Town or Johannesburg. So if anyone is interested in starting new chapters, particularly interested in this work, please let me know.
Wonderful.
Reach out
You
to
will
us.
hear from us.
Awesome, great.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? It seems you have satisfied us. Thank you very much.
Cool, great.
So much.